We're here today on RealAgriculture.com. We're with Jonathan Driedger from FarmLink Marketing. Welcome today, Jonathan.
Thank you, Sean.
Jonathan, we're going to talk about the wheat market. It is definitely the topic of discussion in the coarse grains. It has been on a wild ride. What can we expect going forward as far as the wheat price?
Well, I think, Sean, we can continue to expect a lot of volatility in that market. We've already seen a lot of volatility. We've just seen an incredible price run up. We saw a big sharp limit down move on last week Friday as it corrected, and it's just we've seen a lot of volatility day to day. Intraday moves of 50 cents and as much as a buck a bushel from the highs to the lows. And even though it's settled down here a little bit in the last couple of days, I think we can expect to still see quite a bit of a volatility here going forward.
So a lot of talk about Russia. Is there actually a drought in Russia, or are they just telling us that and going along the future?
No, they genuinely have a big problem out there. There have been some significant damage to their crops out there, and not just in Russia, also to a certain extent in Kazakhstan and the Ukraine. And so it's having a big impact on their production, which in turn is going to significantly impact the amount of grain that those countries will be exporting onto world markets.
I've been hearing numbers that Russia is like 10% of the world's production of wheat. Is that correct?
Yeah, they're a huge producer, and even though they consume a tremendous amount of that internally, they still are a significant exporter on world markets. And so the impact on global trade flows in terms of not having Russian production available, lower numbers out of the Ukraine, lower numbers out of Kazakhstan, it's pretty substantial. And I think it's also a certain amount of suddenness that has had a difference as well. A lot of commercial traders internationally that were maybe short the physical market, didn't have their needs covered, expecting cheap supplies of the Black Sea region in fall like they have for the last number of years, and when those suddenly weren't available, there's been a lot of panic and a lot of chaos, and people looking to try and get coverage, and that's just added fuel to the fire in terms of the volatility and the price run-up.
So in the northern hemisphere, what does this possibly do to winter wheat planting?
Well, expectations are we're going to see a big increase in winter wheat plantings in the U.S., and what that number will be, I guess we'll see. But of course, farmers down south will be making those decisions here very shortly. And so, if this wheat price stays elevated over the coming weeks and next couple of months, we'll see a big increase in acres down south for sure.
Okay. From a Western Canadian perspective, how does these changes to the markets affect pricing strategies that Western Canadian farmers take?
Well, the ripple effects of this of what's going on overseas here really impacts all crop markets. For example, right now the critical window over the next few weeks in early September out there is key in Russia because that's when they plant their winter cereals. And if it continues to be this dry, those acres simply won't get planted. It impacts their production next year, and so it kind of perpetuates the situation. Now, there's a lot of areas, for example, Europe has usually been pretty heavily reliant on cheap feed wheat out of the Black Sea region and some Asian countries as well. If they don't have access to those supplies, then these countries will look at importing corn, whether it's from South America or whether it's from the U.S. We know the U.S. already has a relatively tight corn balance sheet, even with a huge crop coming on its way. And so if that gets tightened up even further, the U.S. Will need to try and find more corn acres next year, and that backs into soybean and so forth. And so, of course, all those markets have big impact on prairie crop prices here as well. And so how this all plays out is going to have a big impact on not just on wheat, obviously, but on everything from barley and canola, and that trickles down often into minor crops as well.
So put on your crystal ball, by the end of the year, are we lower, the same, or higher than where we are now?
Obviously it depends so much on weather here these next few weeks, Sean. I mean, if I had to guess one way or the other, I'd sort of maybe have a positive bias, but really a couple of rain events in Russia over the next few weeks changes the scenario quite dramatically. If there's no rain there, I think it'll be awfully hard to keep this wheat market down, and I think we'll probably continue to see some higher prices.
But if there is rain in Russia, probably expect a dramatic snapback, correct?
I think it could be fairly substantial. It's a little hard to know in this kind of volatility. There's been so much volatility, and traders caught short both in the futures and the cash market. It's hard to know when when they have gotten coverage and how much of that is priced in from a fundamental perspective. But I think it'd be pretty reasonable to expect potentially a fairly sizable pullback if they start to get some rains that are substantive enough to significantly improve their crop picture for next year. But of course, it's just one dynamic. I mean, here in Western Canada, we still have some frost risk, maybe some places in spring wheat and so forth as well. And while not as dramatic and as large a factor in the whole global picture as what's going on in Russia, little things like that can have an impact as well here to prices going forward.
Okay, Jonathan, thanks a lot for joining us again on RealAgriculture.com, and we'll talk to you again soon.
All right, thank you, Sean.